My world, for the first 24 years of my life, was small, but it was whole. It was the world of the First Community Chapel, a white-steepled building at the end of a quiet, tree-lined street. It wasn't just a place I went on Sundays, it was the very air I breathed. My father was a deacon, my mother the head of the ladies' auxiliary. I taught Sunday school to bright-eyed 6-year-olds, my fingers perpetually sticky with glitter and glue. I organized the annual bake sale, my flour-dusted apron a badge of honor. I sang in the choir, my voice joining a chorus that I believed was a direct line to heaven. My life was a tapestry woven with threads of scripture, service, and sacrifice. And at the center of that tapestry was David. David, the pastor's son. He was everything I was taught to want: kind, steady, handsome, and devoted. Our courtship was a community affair, watched over and approved of by the entire congregation. Our engagement was announced from the pulpit. We were their golden couple, a testament to the righteousness of our shared path. For 5 years, every sacrifice I made was for him, for us, for the life we were building. I put aside my own small dream of studying botany to support his seminary studies. I worked evenings as a receptionist to help him with his expenses. My days were a constant hum of motion dedicated to our future, planning our modest wedding, finding a small apartment near the church, and dreaming of the children we would raise within its walls. The love I had for him felt as solid and unshakable as the church's foundation. It was a righteous love, a blessed love, a love that defined me. I was Sarah's sister, the deacon's daughter, but most importantly, I was soon-to-be David's wife. My identity was so deeply entwined with the church and with him that I couldn't tell where I ended and they began.
And I didn't want to.
I was safe. I was loved. I was home. The day it all shattered was my wedding day. The air in the church was thick with the scent of lilies and old wood polish. I was in the small vestry, a room I'd been in 1,000 times before, but it felt alien. I was a stranger in my own skin, encased in layers of white satin and lace that felt more like a costume than a wedding dress. My reflection in the full-length mirror was a woman I barely recognized, her hair perfectly coiffed, her face a mask of nervous excitement. I could hear the organ music starting, the low murmur of the guests finding their seats. My entire world was on the other side of that door, waiting to celebrate me. My sister, Sarah, was my maid of honor. She came in, closing the heavy oak door behind her, and the joyful noise of the congregation was instantly muted. Her face was pale, her lips a thin, tight line. She wasn't holding my bouquet. Her hands were clenched at her sides. "Sarah? Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice a little breathless. I smoothed a wrinkle in my dress. "You looked upset." She didn't answer right away. She just stared at me, her gaze raking over my pristine white dress with something that looked like disgust. "I can't do this," she finally said, her voice a harsh whisper. "I can't stand up there next to you and pretend." My heart started a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. "Pretend?
What are you talking about?"
"Everyone is waiting. They're waiting for a lie," she hissed, taking a step closer. The air crackled with a tension I couldn't understand. "Mom and Dad don't know. Pastor Michael and his wife certainly don't know. David doesn't know, does he?" My blood ran cold. "Know what?" She let out a short, bitter laugh. "Don't play innocent with me. I saw the doctor's appointment in your calendar last month. I saw the pamphlet you tried to hide in your bottom drawer. The one about prenatal vitamins." The room started to spin. The lilies suddenly smelled cloying, funereal. It was true. A secret I held tight in my chest, a fragile, terrifying, wonderful secret. I was 6 weeks pregnant. David and we had slipped up once, a moment of weakness that we had preyed on and promised would never happen again. I was going to tell him on our honeymoon. It would be our secret, our blessing, sanctified by our vows. "How could you?" Sarah's voice was filled with a venom that physically hurt me. "How could you stand there in that white dress, in God's house, and pretend to be pure? You are a walking sin." Her words were stones, each one striking me with brutal force. "Sarah, please," I begged, tears welling in my eyes. "It's not like that. We love each other. We're getting married." "Love doesn't excuse this filth," she spat. "You have disgraced this family. You have made a mockery of everything we believe in." She walked to the door and put her hand on the knob. She turned back to me, her eyes as hard and cold as river stones. "Leave the church," she said, her voice low and deliberate, a death sentence. "You're a disgrace. Leave now, before you humiliate us all any further." And then she opened the door. She didn't have to say anything to the small group of elders and David's parents who were waiting outside, their faces etched with concern. Her expression said it all. The door remained open, and I saw their faces shift from confusion to dawning horror, to righteous judgment. The whispers started instantly. I saw David's mother clutch his father's arm, her face a mask of revulsion. I saw my own mother's eyes fill with tears of shame. I was no longer a bride. I was a spectacle, a sinner, a disgrace. The white dress felt like it was burning my skin. In that moment, my floor disappeared. It was the deepest pain I had ever felt. If you've ever gone through a great disappointment and understand what it's like to have your heart broken, please like this video so I know I'm not alone on this journey. The days that followed are a blur of gray. There was no wedding. David, my David, the man I had dedicated my life to, couldn't even look me in the eye. He sent a message through his father, the pastor. Our union was untenable. My presence was a disruption to the fellowship. I was excommunicated, not with a formal decree, but with the cold, silent shunning of every single person I had ever called friend or family. My parents, caught between their faith and their daughter, chose their faith. Their shame was a wall between us, and they asked me to leave their house, to deal with my situation elsewhere, so as not to bring further embarrassment upon them. I was cast out, utterly and completely alone. I found a small, grim apartment on the other side of town, the kind with stained carpets and a perpetual smell of damp. My savings, meant for a honeymoon in the mountains, dwindled at an alarming rate on a security deposit and first month's rent. The loneliness was a physical weight. The silence in that apartment was deafening, a stark contrast to the life of constant community I had always known. I would sit for hours on the lumpy sofa, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, my hand resting on my still flat stomach. This child, this tiny secret that was supposed to be a joy, had become the mark of my sin, the reason for my exile. Despair was my constant companion. I cried until I had no tears left, my body racked with a grief so profound it felt like a terminal illness. My life hadn't just changed, it had ended. The woman I was, the happy, loved, devout daughter of the church, was dead, and I didn't know the ghost that was left behind. I tried to find work, but I was a poor liar, and my growing belly soon made my situation obvious. The judgment I'd seen in the eyes of my congregation was everywhere, a subtle curl of the lip, a dismissive tone. I was damaged goods. I survived on instant noodles and cheap bread, my body and soul withering away from malnutrition and sorrow. This was my penance, I thought. This was the punishment for my sin. My rock bottom wasn't a single moment, but a long, slow grind into nothingness. One rainy afternoon, huddled in a thin blanket because I couldn't afford to turn the heat on, I was rummaging through the single box of belongings my mother had packed for me. It was mostly old clothes and a few sentimental trinkets. At the very bottom, under a faded quilt, was another smaller box. It was my grandmother's. She had passed away when I was a teenager, a quiet, gentle woman who always smelled of earth and herbs. She was a bit of an outcast herself, I remembered. The church ladies would whisper about her folk remedies and her sprawling, untamed garden. They said she had a wild spirit that wasn't entirely godly. Curiosity, the first emotion other than grief I'd felt in months, stirred within me. I opened the box. Inside, there was no jewelry or fine china. Instead, there were stacks of leather-bound journals, the pages yellowed and brittle with age. Her handwriting was a beautiful, looping script. They were filled, not with scripture, but with recipes. Recipes for chamomile and lavender salves to soothe a baby's rash. Recipes for rosemary and mint soaps to invigorate tired muscles. Recipes for elderberry syrup to ward off winter colds. Each entry was accompanied by detailed drawings of the plants and notes in the margins about their properties, where to find them, and the best time of year to harvest them. It wasn't just a collection of recipes. It was a legacy. It was a different kind of faith. A faith in the earth, in the quiet power of growing things, in the ability of one's own hands to bring comfort and healing. As I read, I felt a flicker of something in the cold, dead center of my heart. It was a tiny, fragile thing, like the first sprout pushing its way through frozen ground. My grandmother, the woman they whispered about, had a knowledge, a power, that had nothing to do with the church, its pews, or its judgments. And she had left it for me. This knowledge wasn't about sin or purity. It was about healing. It was about creating something good and gentle from the soil. The world had told me I was a disgrace, an impurity to be cast out. But here, in these faded pages, was a different gospel. A gospel of roots and leaves, of sun and water. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible fascia of hope. It wasn't a roaring fire, but it was enough to make me want to see the next sunrise. That small fascia became my reason for getting up in the morning. I took the last of my money, and instead of buying another week's worth of instant noodles, I went to a small local nursery and bought a few pots of herbs: lavender, chamomile, rosemary, and calendula. I set them up on the cracked windowsill of my grim little apartment, and for the first time in months, a scent other than despair filled the air. My grandmother's journals became my Bible. I studied them obsessively, cross-referencing her notes, memorizing the properties of each plant. My tiny kitchen became my laboratory. The work was painstaking. My first batch of lavender soap was a greasy, lumpy mess. My first attempt at a calendula salve was too thin and separated within hours. I burned my fingers, wasted precious ingredients, and cried in frustration more times than I can count. But I didn't stop. Every failure was a lesson. Every small success, like a soap that finally set properly or a cream with the perfect consistency, felt like a monumental victory. This work became my prayer, my meditation. As I crushed dried herbs with a mortar and pestle, the rhythmic grinding was a balm to my fractured soul. As I stirred pots of melted beeswax and fragrant oils, I felt a connection to my grandmother, to a lineage of women who knew how to heal. I was no longer just the disgraced girl waiting for her life to be over. I was a creator. I was a student. And slowly I was becoming a healer. Months later, my daughter was born. I named her Grace. She was a beautiful, perfect little thing, and holding her in my arms, I knew I had to make this work.
She was my why.
She was the reason I had to turn that fascia into a sustainable flame. My first real victory came not from a sale, but from an act of desperation. My neighbor, a young woman named Maria with a baby just a few months older than Grace, was at her wit's end. Her son had a terrible case of eczema, his skin red and raw, and he cried constantly. She had tried every cream the doctor prescribed, but nothing seemed to help. One evening, hearing the baby's relentless crying through the thin walls, I gathered my courage. I knocked on her door, holding a small, plain jar of the calendula and chamomile salve I had finally perfected from my grandmother's notes. I explained, stammering a little, that it was just something I made all natural, and that it might help. I expected her to refuse, to look at me with the same suspicion as everyone else. But she was too tired and too desperate. She just nodded, her eyes full of exhaustion, and took the jar. The next morning, she was at my door again, but this time, her eyes were wide with disbelief and gratitude. She was holding her son, who was sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. She showed me his skin. The angry redness had subsided to a pale pink. "I don't know what's in this," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "but it's a miracle." The feeling that washed over me was more powerful than any hymn I had ever sung in the choir. In my darkest moment, I had been cast out for being impure, a source of shame. But here, with my own two hands, using the wild knowledge of my grandmother, I had brought relief and peace. I had healed. That was the moment my purpose crystallized. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about making things right one small jar at a time. Maria told her friends. They told theirs. I started getting tentative knocks on my door, other mothers asking for the miracle cream. I began making more, my tiny apartment a constant flurry of activity, smelling like a fragrant garden. With the small amount of money I made, I bought more supplies and eventually rented a small stall at the weekend farmer's market. I called my little stand Grace's Garden, after my daughter. At first, people were hesitant. I was still an outsider, the young single mother with a sad story she didn't share. But my products spoke for themselves. They were simple, honest, and they worked. People would come back week after week, not just to buy my soaps and salves, but to talk. They told me about their aches and pains, their worries, their children. They saw the genuine care I put into my work, and they responded to it. I wasn't the disgraced girl from the church anymore. I was the herb lady, the woman who could recommend the perfect tea for a headache or a soothing balm for a burn. My reputation grew organically from the ground up, just like my herbs. I saved every dollar, and after 2 years of working at that market, rain or shine, I had enough to lease a small, rundown storefront on a quiet side street. It was my own space, my own sanctuary. I painted the walls a soft green and filled the shelves with my handmade products. I put a comfortable armchair in the corner for nursing mothers and a small play area for toddlers. It became more than a shop. It was a community hub, a place of comfort. I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving. I had a home, a successful business, and a beautiful, happy daughter. It was there, with my own hands, that I began to rewrite my story. I stopped being the victim and became the author of my own destiny. If my journey of overcoming is inspiring you, subscribe to the channel to follow the next chapters and become part of this community of new beginnings. 5 years had passed since that terrible day in the vestry. Grace was a bright, curious kindergartner, her laughter the soundtrack of my life. My shop, Grace's Garden, was my pride and joy, a beloved fixture in the community. The past was a scar, but it no longer ached. It was simply a part of me, a reminder of the strength I never knew I had. Then one Tuesday afternoon, the little bell above the shop door chimed. I looked up from the batch of lotion I was mixing, a smile ready for a customer, and it froze on my face. It was Sarah, my sister. She looked older, tired. The harsh certainty in her eyes had been replaced by a haunted, desperate sadness. She clutched the hand of a small, pale boy who looked to be about 4 years old. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air was thick with the ghosts of everything unsaid between us. The scent of lavender and eucalyptus, usually so calming, suddenly felt charged, electric. "Hello," I said finally, my voice even, steady. It was the voice of a woman she didn't know. "Sarah," she replied, her own voice barely a whisper. She wouldn't meet my eyes, her gaze fixed on a display of chamomile soap. I heard about your shop. People say you make things that help." Her son coughed, a dry, rasping sound that shook his small frame. "This is Leo," she said. "He has this cough that won't go away. The doctors give him inhalers, steroids, nothing works. He can't sleep through the night." She finally looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw not the self-righteous sister who had condemned me, but a terrified mother. The irony was so thick, I could have choked on it. She had come to me, the disgrace, seeking a miracle. The old me, the wounded girl, would have raged. She would have screamed, thrown the years of pain and abandonment back in Sarah's face. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I looked at my sister, and I felt not anger, but a profound, weary pity. I looked at the little boy, my nephew, and I felt only compassion. "Bring him here," I said softly, gesturing to a stool behind the counter. Leo climbed up, looking at me with wide, wary eyes. I spoke to him gently, asking him about his favorite color, his favorite animal, while I listened to his breathing. I went to the back and mixed a small tin of a balm I had developed, a gentle blend of eucalyptus, pine, and thyme in a soft beeswax base. I also measured out herbs for a tea, with marshmallow root and licorice to soothe his throat. I handed them to Sarah, explaining exactly how to use them. She reached for her purse, her hands trembling. "How much do I owe you?" she asked, her voice cracking. This was the moment. The confrontation. But it wasn't going to be the one she expected. "You don't owe me anything, Sarah," I said, pushing her wallet gently away. "This is for your son. This is for Leo." The words hung in the air between us. Her face crumpled, and the tears she had been holding back finally fell. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, the words muffled by her hands. "I was so cruel. I was so wrong. I was so afraid of what people would think. I threw my own sister away. I let her cry. I didn't offer false comfort or easy forgiveness. Some wounds are too deep for a simple bandage." When her sobs subsided, I spoke, my voice quiet but firm. You were cruel, I agreed. And you were wrong. What you did broke me, Sarah. But it didn't destroy me. I built a life from the pieces you and everyone else left behind. I have my daughter. I have the shop. I have a piece you couldn't possibly understand because it's a piece I made for myself. I don't need your apology to be whole. I took a deep breath. I will help your son because he is my nephew and he is suffering. But us? You and I? That is a wound that will take a long, long time to heal. If it ever can. My life is here now. My family is Grace. I am not the person you cast out of the church. She nodded, wiping her eyes, looking at me with a dawning understanding. I wasn't her fallen sister anymore. I was a woman standing on her own ground, in a sanctuary of her own making. She took the remedies, thanked me again in a whisper, and left. As the bell chimed her exit, I felt a final, definitive click inside me. The last chain to my past had broken. My power wasn't in vengeance or in making her grovel. It was in my ability to offer grace without condition, to heal without needing anything in return. My legacy wasn't going to be the shame she had tried to brand me with. It was in the gentle scent of my shop, in the comfort my remedies provided, in the laughter of my daughter as she helped me tie ribbons around bars of soap. I had found my church, not in a building of wood and stone, but in the rich soil of my garden, in the community I had nurtured, and in the quiet strength of my own heart. I learned that being cast out of one story is sometimes the only way to find the courage to write your own. Today, I understand that the wounds of the past don't define who we are, but what we do with them does. I am immensely grateful that you have listened to my story this far. If it has touched you, share it with someone who needs a light, and leave a comment with a word of strength and hope. Together, we are stronger.